Hello and welcome to the show. #TRoDWaSS, the podcast. This is the audiobook for the realizations of Depression Warrior and Suicide Survivor by Denmark R. Aranas. Today's episode is about my realizations outside my mind. First chapter, recognizing and breaking the stigma. The greatest dilemma of people living with mental illness is the stigma against them. Here in the Philippines, there's a strong disapproval when someone shows any form of weakness, especially mentally and emotionally. It is a disgrace to come for psychiatric consults, thinking that when someone does, they are crazy already. And it is shameful to have a friend or a relative who are struggling mentally, because what matters most for many Filipinos is the image of perfection. A family would not want to admit that they have a member who is struggling from mental illness, for that would disdain the name of the family. Or worse, people would see them as dysfunctional. Filipinos have been ingrained with toxic positivity and would brush off their mental health because they are thinking of how others would see and say about them. This is due to one's tendency to think highly of oneself. No one wants to be associated with mental illness because of the stigma it is associated with. And so, here we encounter wrong advice from people with this mindset. And worse, they would invalidate what one is experiencing or struggling with. They would say that it's just a phase and just get over it. Others would compare one problem of a person to another and tell them how trivial one has compared to that. Many would see one person with mental illness as overacting and just wanting attention. And worse, people have stereotyped those living with mental illness as person rugged and distraught, when actually, mental illness does not have any face to represent it well. For people living with it may seem to be just anyone else who does not have it. The stigma also opens the door for discrimination. People with mental illness are judged forever as crazy and no longer functional. But that is not true. People with mental illness can be anyone and can be someone who is an overachiever and even optimistic, famous and influential, leader and innovator, even religious and righteous. People tend to disqualify persons with mental illness for jobs and roles in the society because they discriminate them as someone as no good and even a liability. I pray for a day where having a mental illness would be no different to having any form of disease we have, where we consider it as nothing else but it is, where bias and prejudice are set aside. People with mental illness are never defined by their condition. They are so much more than their illness. It is so sad to receive a message that my condition would disqualify me in applying for residency training, and it could be used against me. I never imagined people would be that inconsiderate. Never imagined life could be that hard for people with mental illness. No matter what happens, I will continue to fight against mental health discrimination. I ask for strength from the Lord Jesus Christ that He may bless each and every one to have an open heart and mind for people with mental illness. All of these forces imprison people experiencing mental illness to suppress and hide what they are feeling. They are afraid of how people tend to misunderstand and, even worse, abandon them. And so, they shun their mental illness until they totally cave in and decide to abandon themselves. Sadly, many give up the battle because of this stigma and lack of support for people living with mental illness. After recognizing the stigma, the best response is to do our very best to break or even destroy it. In the family, that is where the change should start. Filipino parents should be enlightened about the importance of mental health, and seeking help for it is never disgraceful for the image of the family. Instead, it shows how understanding and supportive the family is to one another. Filipino parents, please make it a priority to advise your children about taking good care of their mental health. Filipino parents, please encourage seeking psychiatric consultations in your family, for it is no different from any other disease we seek help for. Allow your children to express themselves and feel their emotions. The validation and support for people living with mental illness should start and be strongest in the family. The next thing to understand is how to eradicate toxic positivity. Tanglao Mental Health gave the best definition for it. They said that it is the excessive and ineffective overgeneralization of happy and optimistic state in any situation. In the denial, minimization, and invalidation of genuine human emotional experience.